Hello there, folks. Welcome back to Earworms. I'm your host, Lawrence W. Moore of the Wayfarer Project. This is episode 2. Episode 1 was a real humdinger. If you haven't seen that, if this is your first time joining us, it's worth checking out. In episode 1, we did some of the early instruments in the evolution of electronic music, namely like the musical telegraph, the telharmonium, and the singing arc, some of those early innovations. And tonight, we are also going to be looking at another early innovation called the theremin. And it's truly a magical instrument. Here at Earworms, we are into all things that are for the mind, for the heart, for the soul, all sounds that intrigue us. For like bookworms love books, we love ears. Well, we love the sound experiences that your ears can hear. So without further ado, I am going to put on my headphones here. And if I'm aware of my keyboard shortcuts, I should be going into avatar mode. Commence avatar mode now. There we go. All right. And next step, we're going to bring on one can think of this man as the Ed McMahon in the wormiest of all shows on the internet. Here is Mr. Jay Goodwin. How you doing, Jay? You're not Jay. You're Adam Gray. Hello, Jay.
As Ed McMahon, I'm the one that's supposed to be drinking, not you.
Well, I'm not. This is normal me, folks. Plus, those of you who are watching the stream didn't see, we basically had a false start where I basically started everything off and didn't realize until my wife kind of flagged me down that I didn't press the broadcast button. So,
I mean, the great thing is that backstage, we got to listen to that intro music twice.
Yeah,
I'll go another 30 minutes with that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it looks like I spoiled the surprise, but we might as well whip this gentleman out anyway. Mr. Adam Gray, first time on Earworms. But since it's only the second episode, you're in 50% of it.
Well, that's about my batting record in life. So I feel like today was a win. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Yes, we are doing the theremin today. And one of the things I know about the theremin, and we will be covering this a little later on after we get through, shall we say, an introduction to what the instrument is. We're going to be looking at some films that it was utilized in, and that's one of the areas where it was, shall we say, fairly heavily utilized. But before we get to that, we should figure out what it is. But that's why these two gentlemen will be quite helpful. Adam Gray and Jay Goodwin are on the panel. Well, Adam leads the panel on B-Sides, the stream on B-Roll Stage. The information's in the description. You can find that channel so that, you can kind of hear some people riff on some, shall we say, uniquely enjoyable films. You can introduce the channel yourself, Adam.
It's a niche. Yeah, my wife and partner in crime, Barbara Lawrence, who's down in the chat here. We run a live show every Friday evening, and we show a wide variety of cult classics, B movies, and my God, we do enjoy some theremin. Absolutely.
I mean, that's mandatory drinking. We hear a theremin.
I mean, is there a bad movie with a theremin? Maybe one I can think of.
Yeah, and I think you saw it.
Yeah, I saw a clip and I was good after that.
Yeah. We're going to be getting to that one, but it should be mentioned. But in any case, check this channel out. I usually am in the chat there on Friday nights. Now that I realize it is Friday nights, I always thought it was Saturday, but Friday nights. It's 7 p.m. Eastern time, but I think you guys are on the West Coast, right?
Yeah, Barbara and I are in the San Diego area, so it's 4:30ish for us right now.
Okay, right now. But I mean, like your stream starts?
Live, we are 6 p.m. Pacific time.
Oh, 6 p.m. Huh. I guess
It runs for
little...
hours. You would be amazed at how long it goes on.
Okay.
Jake could testify.
I know I'm amazed that we go that long sometimes. And
Yeah, I bailed out after you guys started playing that game where it's a game.
Oh, the Rift
where you
Tracks
actually-
game?
Yeah.
That was our
Yeah.
first time with that. That was good
Yeah.
fun. R2 hosted that for us. That was nice.
No, yeah, that was cool, but I was tired by then, so.
You could sleep
But-
when you're dead. Watch B movies.
All right. Well, anyway, folks, I'm going to pull up now some slides because we're going to start talking about the theremin. Now, you may have noticed that I have this thing for AI art. And you can see that right here. This is a picture of a not theremin and a not human.
that's a human that may have had to reveal some secrets after having fingers broken in multiple directions.
Is that Klaus Nomi's sister?
She's got a real problem with those hands, though.
Yeah, AI still can't get that right. But in any case here, I thought it would still be appropriate because I did a search for, not a search, but I typed into stable diffusion, picture of a theremin. This is one thing I got, and the other one I put on the title screen, and that one that looks kind of like a white radio box, that was its second attempt at a theremin. So anyway, I thought they were cool anyway. So here we are, the theremin, 1919, 1922, 1929. Why do I have three dates here? Well, 1919 was basically when it was, I hear from some people as 1920, from some people 1919, is when basically the theremin was actually invented and created by this guy. Hold on.
Is there a patent date?
Oh, that's 1929, the U.S.
Okay.
patent.
Okay.
All right,
But we're
but
gonna.
it was originally in the it was
Sure,
in Russia
sure,
before.
sure.
It was invented in Russia by this guy, Lev Sergeivich Termen. They changed the spelling for the instrument and for the his last name. I'm not sure why, because in Russia it's the Cyrillic alphabet, so whatever we make in our alphabet's going to be spelled, whatever way we want it. But when you see his name written out, his original name, it's written like on the left, and on the right is how you would see it in most English-speaking countries. So he was a Russian scientist, and he was, at that time, the revolution did happen already. He did serve in the military, both under the Tsar and then under Vladimir Lenin. And under Lenin, he worked in an area that was basically in electronics, but also some broadcasting as well. And, with some experiments in trying to create security devices like proximity detection, motion detectors, that sort of thing, he came across creating this invention. The one you see in the center there, this picture, is not AI. It is a real theremin. And it was basically the prototype as it was created then. So in 1919 or 1920, that basically is when it was created. 1922, you hear a lot of times, as I show in the previous slide, but that's mostly due to, that was when he introduced it to Vladimir Lenin, who liked it and decided to take some lessons on it. And that was towards the end of his life, but he liked it very much. And it was good that it was liked because at that time, the new Soviet Union was interested in trying to show the rest of the world that they could do some pretty good things. And Theremin was sent to the Frankfurt, Germany, where he gave a presentation on the theremin, and it kind of basically opened it up to some Western dignitaries and everything, and eventually he got approved, believe it or not, I guess from both sides, to go to the United States, and he moved to the United States, I believe, in 1927. So by 1929, he basically had sold the patent to RCA, and that's when the Theremin basically came to America. You guys want to say anything? Because I feel like I'm just running off at the mouth here, and I don't want to turn this into a class.
Oh, well, I actually appreciate that. I'm going to learn more tonight than I'm going to contribute. I think uh, I love the sound of it. I have a little bit of basic knowledge about the inventor, very basic knowledge, but yeah, please go ahead. I'm
All right.
fascinated.
And
I
to
mean,
the chat.
the
Go
kind
ahead.
of the history of this is so they're experimenting with radio and heterodyne and superheterodyne systems where you take two radio frequencies and then if you combine them, adding frequencies or like subtracting them, you get because they cancel out, so many other waveforms. And so you have these two radio frequency level signals that the cancellation of which drop it down into the auditory range. And it's the human body, its capacitance messes with it, which is a thing that a lot of early radio pioneers ran into problems with antennas. He happened to see this happen and didn't see it as a problem, saw it as something interesting to pursue.
Well, yeah, it was a way of detecting proximity as well. I do want to mention to the chat out there that my wife at Psyche Opera is in the chat, but also kind of behind the scenes here, and we'll be flashing up some of your chats on screen. If you have questions, please ask, and I will endeavor to answer them. But in the meantime, let's just see how this works. Now, you see in the picture on screen, the gentleman's left hand is over what is I guess back then, was it a coil at that time? Well, later it became a coil, but it is an antenna. And that antenna is what controls the amplitude, which we basically perceive as volume when it comes out of speaker. And then the right hand is next to a vertical antenna, and that detects proximity. The closer the hand is to the antenna, oh man, I might just get this backwards. I believe it is the highness of pitch, and the further away, the lower of pitch. And if I got that backwards, I highly apologize. It's just, I know it's one way or the other, but I've played around with a number of things that work inversely. And so we could talk about that later. But in any case, you have pitch control with the right hand, basically, and with the left hand, basically volume control. Now, the thing is, it's very delicate because you have no way, like in any other instrument, you typically have some keys to press. Guitars, you have fret markings that you could feel as well as see to know where pitch is. In the violin and cello, the string instruments and that whole string family, yes, there is a fretless board there. But, players kind of get used to the spacing of their fingers and the finger position through practice. They just kind of feel.
I actually played slide trombone as a young kid, and it's the same way. You just learn positions by muscle memory, so there's no actual stops, in a trombone or something like that.
Yeah. Well, in the
interesting
trombone
thing though is like with the theremin, because it's depending on the body's capacitance, it can differ in conditions and your clothing or how moist or dry you are. So you kind of have to first initially feel and get a idea for how it's going to react to you, and then kind of do it. So your positions aren't always consistent, right? They're like relative. So you kind of have to figure out your baseline, and then you can kind of move within that.
Yeah,
so you
there
do
is
have to like tune up when you first approach the instrument to
Pretty much,
perform.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Cool.
Yeah, it's like a slide trombone where the slide is unpredictable where it's going to begin and end, right? Like it's a variable length, but once you figure out what the base length is, then you can go ahead and play it normally.
Interesting.
Yeah, although trombonists have been known to be good at adapting to the theremin. At
Is
least
that a
compared to
thing?
maybe
I need a theremin
in
now.
one of the videos that I saw, that's what the gentleman said, and he's a thereminist as well as he knows about like the ins and outs of the instrument, and it was mostly because with the string instruments, it's kind of like relative position of the fingers, and it becomes kind of like a finger position memory even when there's no frets. But with a trombone, it's kind of like the extension of your arm.
We're
And
talking about a
here,
full arm movement. Yeah.
yeah, and here it's kind of like the extension of your arm. And what thereminists usually do is they calibrate the instrument when they start, and so they get into the position that they want to be in to say this will be my middle C, for example. This is where I want my middle C to be, and once they feel where they're at, they'll set the calibration to get the range in tune for where they want to feel themselves for their middle C.
Right, adjust the radio signals in it.
Yeah, I've seen a video on that. We'll mention the artist towards the end. A modern day thereminist, saw a great video with her and a guitarist playing, and she was playing the theremin in a way that it sounded like a slide guitar almost, and it was very beautiful.
Now, if I remember right, the first theremins, the amplitude was actually controlled with the foot, wasn't it? There was like a foot pedal, a progressive
You know what?
pedal.
I believe that's true. Now the thing is, here we are seeing a very early theremin, and it is using a hand. It looks like the hand was used pretty early on. Like this is Leon Theremin himself.
Right.
But yeah, there might have been pedal versions. I mean, yeah, now that you mentioned, I've kind of heard of that, but yeah, and putting all this together, I think, I don't know, but I see these guys kind of using the hands, but so anyway, hey, let's put that out there. Our chat could be like mad geniuses and let us know. Now here is just a picture that I don't know why the hell I put this in. I was just like, hey, look, a modern looking theremin.
So it's a Moog theremin.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Bob will have a word with you about pronouncing his name, but
yeah. That's fine. He knows where to find me.
Exactly.
Yeah, in fact, I have a Bob right here. I know it sounds like a soundboard, but that's actually a Moog Workshop.
Oh, I do love that this looks like the Amazing Kreskin and a Moog theremin. It's
but those are the
mix.
Yeah, those are the theremins that are like big these days. I mean, not just big, but it's like for decades now, Moog, of course, has had a legendary name in synthesis and electronic music instruments. And his theremins, I think, are the ones that I've seen. Most of the professionals that I've seen videos of are using Moog theremins. And so we're going to look at those a little bit here quickly. I don't
know what model our friend Jethro uses. I actually have not seen him play live, but I imagine it would be a Moog.
It may not be. I mean, I'm just saying that from just the perspective of the videos that I've seen of thereminists performing, and I've been able to identify Moog at least more often than not. But in electronic,
that make their own because they're pretty straightforward to make.
Are they easy to build
from an electronic standpoint? Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
they may not have the features of the Moog, but
yeah, I guess I'm at a delay. I got to get used to this rhythm of when to speak and when not to. But anyway, here we have the schematic, a very simplified schematic. But we have the antenna here, and they map it next to an oscillator. But I think in between is really kind of like the, it's similar to a condenser microphone, where basically it uses capacitance to kind of read the capacitance of our body next to the antenna. And then it transfers that to an oscillator. The oscillator here for the volume is going to be, what do you call that? It's basically going to be controlling the amplitude of the sound. So next what it goes to is this envelope. Basically it's a filter that filters out frequencies below a certain point and above a certain point. And then the third one over. I'm pointing with a mouse cursor. No one can see that, right? Yeah.
No,
that's
we can't
pretty
see your mouse. I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
All
Did you
right.
make
Well,
yourself happy?
would I make myself happy?
No, I said go ahead and do what you
Okay.
enjoy. You can play with your mouse all night long. It's fine.
Okay. All right. But anyway, and next to that is the envelope generator, which is basically a component that's used to control amplitude in just about everything electronic music. And so that would control when the notes stop or start, but that is basically lifting your hand up or down. Basically, if you put your hand all the way down on the antenna, you turn off the sound. And that's why it's comfortable using the coil antennas, because it's just kind of like this metal ring, round ring, and you put your hand on it and it just stops it.
Yeah, I have seen that.
And so then on the other end, along with what Jay was saying, we have two oscillators here. And you see that right to the right of the antenna on the bottom row. And the two oscillators, one of them is stable. It's not hooked up to the antenna. It's set at a specific stable frequency that you can calibrate because of the calibration possibilities that we talked about earlier. And basically what it takes is the difference between those two oscillators are basically found through the mixer section. And so when they're mixed together, the difference is found, and that basically gives you what the pitch is that is tuned to the range you want to play in. And then that goes through a low pass filter, which basically cuts out the higher frequencies that would be too high for human perception or for human comfort, maybe in some cases. And then it'll basically go out the amplifier and the speaker. And that amplifier, as you see, has control from the volume antenna fed right into it. So that's how it shapes the sound together. So this is kind of simplified. Overall, I think the concept may be simple. Maybe making a really good one could be challenging. But the concept has been used a lot by tinkerers to make all sorts of things.
Well, this is an approachable project. I mean, I'm a very, very basic electronics guy, very, very basic. I don't read diagrams that well, but it seems like something that like you could do as a hobby that wouldn't be too frustrating to actually build and play around with.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen kits. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I've seen kits.
Well, yeah, I mean the circuit itself is pretty straightforward, and I mean it's certainly easier for us now than it would have been back in in the early days of the Theremin, because we have things like crystal oscillators that we can use that are very reliable, very consistent. They don't drift nearly as much, and so yeah, it's and plenty of ICs that you can put in. That will replace a lot of old analog parts that you would have had to wire up.
From what I've been hearing, I'm surprised you haven't built one yet.
Oh, I got enough on my plate right now with a couple of synth builds that I'm doing.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah. You can talk to my wife about that. She does a lot of the electronics work that that we do in our interests and so forth, especially with a cigar box guitar making preamps and piezos and she's actually
I'm a pretty good assembly guy. Like I actually did help install a full recording studio in Lake Tahoe, and I don't know, we soldered something like 18,000 connections and all the custom cables and everything to go with that. But it's the theory and reading the diagrams and things that I'm a little lacking in.
yeah. I think the old Radio Shack used to have a series of books by Forrest Mims, and I'm pretty sure that he had one on the Theremin. And the thing about Mims is he was very good about explaining how it worked, what the theory was behind the circuit, putting in the schematic and telling you what's going on, and then would you could get the project itself. So,
well, we have a question here from Roberto Cejido. Any polyphonic theremin instruments? And I would say I am not aware of one. Although a performer that I've seen on videos uses a chorus pedal or a delay pedal sometimes in order to create some polyphony, basically by playing like an idea or sustaining a pitch and then having it looped by the delay and
You might be able to
approaching it
pull
that
up.
way.
Yeah, you might be able to pull up paraphonics, where multiple voices are being triggered by the same movement, based on different antennas and oscillators. True polyphony might be a little. I mean, how many digits do you have? Appendages that you're going to wave around in the air to be able to trigger it.
Yeah, and if they're in too close a proximity, they'll be
Yeah, then they
detecting
just
each
become
other.
right. I
So,
mean, arguably you could do it now, not necessarily with the, well, I mean, you could if you were using, millimeter wave microwaves or something like that, and literally track fingers and hands, but it wouldn't quite be
well,
the classic theremin.
yeah, cell phones do that in a way where it can detect like 4 fingers on the screen or 3, and maybe detect their different movements and so forth. But
Yeah,
that
that's more capacitive resistive touch, but millimeter wave radar is actually used in motion tracking for certain
oh, okay.
things now, but you wouldn't it wouldn't really behave the same way. You wouldn't just do the heterodyne addition to get the audible signal. You would need more work underneath it.
Yeah. Uh, so there you go, Roberto. Hopefully that answers your question. So basically, if you want to get closer and closer to polyphony, you get further and further away from it actually being like a theremin. But maybe employ those principles in a way, but making it something that a musician would want to play is another thing. Like, for example, the theremin kind of had a rough start. In 1929 is when it, was released by RCA, and at the time they had some marketing issues. Well, they kind of released it as being something that would be easy to play. They kind of marketed it that way because they thought, well, you don't have all those buttons to press or anything. It's like,
And it's
yeah,
a lot
but
nicer than giving your kids a drum set,
yeah,
not nearly so jarring.
yeah. But in 1929, there was a certain stock market crash that kind of made luxury items a little less approachable.
Did dry up the market a bit,
It was,
yeah.
yeah. So, but this is it. This is what got released. So even at that point, as you can see there, well, that's on the left-hand side. Yeah,
It's
because it's
a lovely
player's
cabinet.
perspective.
Are we looking at something with vacuum tubes in it, or
Yeah.
yeah?
Yeah,
Yep.
Okay.
yeah, for the capacitance.
Your
Ah,
amplifier
okay.
your
Got it.
amplifier would have been
Amplifier.
a vacuum tube, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the loop on the left is your amplitude controller, but we use for amplitude, like AM antennas are frequently in the home loops, although that's a different beast. All right, so anyway, so let us move onward here. Okay, and then it's going to be a couple of Moogs here in a row. This is a smaller Moog Theremin. I think this is actually even the same one that we saw in the previous picture, just without the smiling guy. But they have a line called the Ether Wave line, and it has a couple of tiers. I think earlier on there may have been 2, and then it became more. There is no affiliate link in the description, folks. I'm just talking about
You're
these.
not sponsored by a defunct company.
No. So anyway, there's the Etherwave, and then there's an Etherwave Pro,
Oh, that's good looking.
and then there's another one like this that came out a few years ago, called the Clara Vox, and it's named for Clara Rockmore, who was a legendary theremin performer. And so that one actually looks kind of similar to this one, the Etherwave Pro. But this one is the one that I've seen like in the studios of thereminists. And when I'm looking through all these pictures of professional performers, I see this a lot. Not everyone, but I see it a lot. It also has controls for changing the waveform that you're using. So you can do things like square wave, triangular wave, or sawtooth wave, and then you can filter it too because it has filtering options there for creating sounds like. Well, I don't. Do you have to keep doing that? That was just like a simple low pass filter there, and basically using filtering like that is how you shape sound and create different timbres. So this will be capable of making sounds that could sound different than the traditional early theremin sound. So anyway,
Yeah, it's a functionality that while not using the theremin, using different kind of hand movement inputs like D-beam, the I think Roland was pretty famous for having on a lot of synths or whatever, where just waving your hand or bringing it near or far away, you could tie to resonator or other effects in the synth. So it was theremin like in the way that you controlled it rather than just twisting knobs and pressing keys.
There's something about just the user interface of a theremin style model that is really compelling. I'm not someone that can play piano or anything like that. It just the idea of alternative interfaces is very appealing to me.
Yeah, and it's kind of in the Moog instruments, the aether wave. So the idea that you're just making music out of the ether of the air by moving around, right? It's kind of inherent in the name.
oh
Yeah, not to jump ahead too far, but you see people kind of trying to reinvent the wheel in the 90s and the 2000s with like light harps and things
Right.
like that. None of which strike me as nearly as charming as this sort of capacity.
Yeah, I think the
waving
biggest
your hands.
problem that you have with a lot of those, and especially in the '90s, I mean, the Roland D beams were an example of that. You kind of get stair stepping, aliasing when you move your hands. It's not a
Right.
smooth, continuous sound like you do when you're actually operating with this
It's not analog. That
capacitance
Yeah.
driven system.
Yeah. Give me the analog, thanks.
Yeah.
well, someone by the name of Barbara Lawrence has mentioned that it sounds like the Electric Light Parade at Disney World.
She
And-
is a former employee of the Mouse, so she
Oh,
would
yeah.
know.
I'm not sure if that's the theremin or what I just played.
Well, all
But
of the above. And
could
Roberto asked an interesting question. Did RCA ever put out theremin albums? And I believe they did. There were a lot of like RCA did, especially if they did instruments or any kind of new audio technology they came out with. They would tend to put out albums that people could at least listen to it.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was a DJ for many years with live bands and in clubs. Those old RCA sound records are one of the most sought after pieces of vinyl you can ever get your hands on.
Right.
They put out so many just fantastic libraries of different sounds just for the sake of displaying the sound. I mean, obviously they're selling a product with a theremin album, but those records are great.
Yeah, there were probably demo albums put out. I didn't highlight those because I'm going to be highlighting some album releases that were by like Harry Revel. We're going to get to pretty soon, and we'll talk about Clara Rockmore. And then we'll talk about the Samuel J. Hoffman, who was for a long time, like in the 40s and into the early 50s, he was like maybe the only thereminist in Hollywood that could read music and perform accurately.
That's a good gig.
Well,
Yeah,
actually,
he's going to get real busy.
Actually, before we get to Clara here, let's just back up a bit. I want to play this so I can get it kind of out of the way because we were talking about building things and, going like some alternate routes with the concept. my wife and I were doing a little playing around with a thing called an Arduino. I'm
Hmm.
sure you've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
worked in like haunted house attractions and that kind of thing where Arduinos are pretty common.
well, she was using an Arduino and an ultrasonic range sensor to make an I was going to say exhibit, but no, installation.
Hmm.
That's the word. An installation that we were doing for the university we were teaching at the time. And basically, it was this Mona Lisa face that would respond and talk to you depending on how close you were to it. And she used a range sensor and like an Arduino to do that. And then we tried, just for fun, to hook it up to my Moog Workstatt. Okay, I think that's enough of that.
I
I
mean,
feel like I'm having a flashback to an Art Bell show I was listening to in the desert. That's
yeah, exactly. It was like I'm sure there's
Mel's
plenty of
Hole.
ghost hunter TV shows that would be very interested in
That
having your
was super
services.
creepy.
Yeah, it's basically what we were generating there was formants, which is basically when you're able to make vowel sounds and some consonant sounds using synthesis. And really, I just turned up the I just found a good carrier frequency that was like in the right range that had like kind of like vocal tendencies, and then I just turned up the filter to a certain point. But what happened is that ultrasonic range sensor, which detects sound above the frequency spectrum, but it uses that sound detection to basically ping distance. And so it was able to detect the distance of my hand there, and we found a good range that kind of worked. But the thing is, the numbers we were seeing coming through were like constantly changing really fast, slight changes really fast, and that made the filter move slight degrees really fast, and that popped out a bunch of formants, and it was like a beast, man.
Yeah, and the other
I
thing is a lot of those, like your DAC or ADC, depending on which side you're pulling in from, you'll get kind of stair stepping, which gets real interesting when it hops noticeably between two voltages where it's not smooth and continuous. You get some really neat effects, depending on how your sense is set up.
Well,
Yeah.
technical schmechnical. I wanted in my sci-fi horror movie, and I want it now. That sounds great.
Well, anyway, we shall soldier on. And here's a picture of Clara Rockmore. She was born Clara Reisenberg. And the description of her was, that she was born in what was technically the Russian Empire, but it was a place called Vilnius. And she was described as a Litvik, which I should have kind of looked up further.
It's
But
Lithuania, I believe.
yeah,
Lithuanian something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, Vilnius is in Lithuania.
Wow.
yeah. So
Aside from being lovely, what a cool name, Rockmore. Can I get that name?
well,
Gee.
that might have been. I didn't
Americanized.
really look this up. I
Or
think,
staged.
yeah, or marriage. I don't know. Although it would probably be hard for a guy to capture this one.
She does have that look on her face, like she's just encountered 4 or 5 hours of B-sides.
Yeah.
I have that look every Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Well, she actually did study with Theremin because when he came over in 1927, he did work with musicians that wanted to learn the theremin, and he would teach lessons. And she was originally a classical violinist, and I guess she also continued to work as a classical violinist because the theremin work was probably not as huge, but she was really known for, performing the theremin with orchestras, primarily in what we call classical music, Western art music. And so even though she toured a lot, it wasn't until the 70s. She started in the 30s. In the 70s is when she first was recorded. And the producer of that album, the album called Art of the Theremin, is called Robert Moog, once again. He produced the album, and I do have in the description reference links. Because if we were going to play any of this, we'd get copyright flagged. So
I am familiar with that.
yeah, so it's like fun having a electronic music stream where you can't really play much of anything.
Just close your eyes and imagine music, and that's what's going
But
on. It's very exciting.
well, you can open it up in a new tab. Anyone that's like at a computer or something, and if you're capable of opening up in a new tab, you can listen to some of her performances there. And basically, it's from the history of Western art music, some of the major pieces, and it's an excellent recording and excellent performance. But Robert Moog in the 70s helped produce that album because it was like just too long, almost 40 years of her doing concert performances, and she wasn't recorded until then, or at least wasn't recorded properly.
Professionally.
Talk about lost media, man.
Yeah, and so many artists, that were, very popular, but we just never got recordings of them. They may have become famous for public performances, but for some reason or other, it just never gets recorded. And you're like, oh, I really wish I could go back and listen to those people.
Yeah, and the pianist on the album is her sister, Nadia Reisenberg, who I guess didn't change her name or... I feel bad. I should look up in more detail. Did she get married? Is that why she's a Rockmore? Or
Nadia may have rocked less, and that really wasn't going to be a good marketing name.
I don't think anyone would accuse you of not doing enough research, Lawrence. I think you seem like the most prepared person I've ever StreamYarded with.
Yeah, I guess, since I'm used to the classroom and stuff like that, I sometimes feel like, damn it, I should have, But if I do that, man, if I do that, it's like, at this point in my life, it's like, I'm great. I mean, I'd love to learn things, but digging at everything to write a paper is not what I want to do anymore with my life. So anyway,
you get the interesting things and the hows and whys, and that's good enough.
So anyway, folks can hear her music below later, or if you want to now, a little bit. And here we get to the fun part of the show where you guys can...
I recognize this.
Shine.
Hey, that's a good movie. I haven't seen one of those in a long time.
My first introduction into public domain content. It was either when I was in high school or after I dropped out of high school. And I discovered discount dollar VHS bins. I picked this up and wore the hell out of the tape. Really fantastic surrealism in this film. Yes. Eventually, I learned more about Hitchcock and whatnot. But wonderful sound and great visuals.
I do have here some of the credits, at least what would be appropriate to our show. I was surprised to see, 3 writers. Now, was it common to have that many writers at that time on films?
Not credited, but in process, yes, absolutely. We're talking about like the golden era of Hollywood factory, and I say that in a good way, not in a disparaging way, but they built a system that worked for them, and all the major studios used it, and you'd have at least, just for example, like you'd have at least 6 people touching a script like Casablanca.
Okay.
yeah. So many script doctors, and I mean, if you were part of the script rooms in those studios in that era, you were good.
Yeah, I knew that there was like definitely a lot of writers on things today, and but I, but from the older movies, you see fewer people listed. Maybe it's just because they're listing more than might normally be listed.
Well, it was only
But
recently that you were allowed to put more than one director credit on a film. It
oh,
hasn't been that long. There have been people that fought for it and lost against the Directors Guild and the Writers Guild and so on. But yeah, that whole machine is humming along on the back lot.
Yeah, the
Well,
the Writers Guild, later on, start having requirements for giving credit to essentially anybody that held a pencil, whether they wrote anything or not. But in this era, the Hollywood studios, they really were like, I mean, they were sausage factories, and they very much did not want you to know how the sausage was made. So a lot of the expertise was hidden, and there's a lot of people that aren't actually credited who did a lot of that work.
so I kind of listed the director first, and then because he was a legend and as a director, pretty important in a movie. And then I thought I'd put the writers in because they wrote the stuff. And then next, you usually don't see this, but I put the composer in, Nicholas Rosa, because we're talking about music here primarily. And this is a Hungarian born composer who, at this time, was a bit more experimental in Hollywood. And later on, he went on to write some of the major scores for some pretty big films like
And
Ben Hur.
And I
think
think
you
a
may have
movie
heard of
like,
that.
especially like Spellbound, is one where the music is so much of the movie. It really is both visual and
Well,
audio.
you're trying to reproduce a hypnotic dream state,
Right,
so the audio is critical.
right. It's
I'll
so
be
much of the
honest.
world. Right.
Yeah,
It's like trying to talk about Blade Runner and not bringing up Vangelis. Right.
exactly,
It's just
exactly. Yeah,
crazy.
it has to be there, and it has to be a little bit off-putting and a little uncomfortable, but still listenable.
Yeah, and frankly, those composers should be high up in the credits, right? That's not buried halfway through,
Yeah.
because
Let's
they're.
not go there. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, but yeah, he went on also to do Ben Hur and The Robe. And so at that time, Hollywood was really looking for that kind of Eastern European high romantic period type of sound.
mhm.
As
I'm
well as
sorry to cut in. Excuse my ignorance. The Paul Schur that we're talking about, is that the Schur company?
the thing I have to tell you is I don't know for sure.
Oh, okay. Well, Jay knows everything. Jay, is that the Shure microphone that we're talking about
I'm
there?
not sure. Well,
Yeah, I'm
let's
not.
just go ahead and keep making this pun all day
All
long.
right.
But I
Sorry.
lack certainty with regards
And
to.
well,
Sorry
it's
for the derail.
spelled the right way,
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
it is.
I don't know. And in fact, you know what? I think I may have made a mistake because he actually should be listed for The Day the Earth Stood Still, the next one. Samuel
Mm.
J. Hoffman was the only thereminist in this one. I think I pasted it into the wrong place.
I think we
So
can be confident it's not Polly Shore.
yeah, yeah, we can be sure about that.
No,
But
no,
anyway,
this is someone with talent.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
no, Paul Shore was not was not one of the performers in Spellbound. This was actually for The Day the Earth Stood Still. I'm sorry about that, folks.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm just curious. I
No,
recognize the
no,
name.
I'm apologizing to our audience, but I just kind of pasted it
Moving
into the wrong
on.
slide. Yeah, but
Those
anyway,
responsible have been sacked.
yeah, me. Samuel J. Hoffman was the chief. So he was the only thereminist in this, and he was the chief thereminist in Hollywood. He was a chiropodist by day, which I think is chiropractor in American English.
Wow.
I'm not sure.
I don't know
Yeah.
that term, but I'll take your
Well,
word.
chiropodist. I know that the Brits say that, and I'm wondering, is that a chiropractor? Because it basically is chiropedist. sounds kind of like
Chiropederast? Sorry, I had to. Sorry.
Maybe it's foot and back doctor. I don't know. But anyway,
well,
he
or
did.
foot and bone.
But he did it, and that was his day job because I guess even though he was in the musicians union, listed as a thereminist, and basically the only one that could read music and play accurately, like orchestral level. Basically, I think that just wasn't something that Clara Rockmore decided to do. Otherwise, she probably, would have been in there too. But she went a different route than, being in the Musicians Guild in Hollywood. So he got the gigs. I don't know how well they paid or anything like that. I guess since in the union, probably all right. But he still was a chiropodist by day. So anyway, I do have a link to the Dali. It's called the Dali scene because the visuals are kind of like reminiscent of Salvador Dali, and so that link is in the description. It's a short clip if you want to check it out, but you can kind of hear how the theremin melts with the orchestra, and it really just sounds kind of like I don't know. I find it to blend in quite well, and just add that extra eeriness to it because it could basically do some things that even a string instrument like a violin couldn't quite do because it wasn't as, I guess, fluid to do vibrato. I mean, you do some major vibrato on violin, but it's not going to sound the same as when you're just kind of like moving your hand like this and just kind of like getting that kind of a shake in the sound. It's just different.
Yeah, you're constrained by the string because you have to, exercise the muscle to hold down the string and then rock your hand back and forth. But there's a single point of contact versus just waving in the air,
Yeah, and so the fluidity of it is different. And of course, the way you have to play the theremin is that a lot of times you got to launch into that vibrato fairly soon just to kind of hide, if you're off by a little bit. But, the way they use their hands, they will, I mean, there's different ones, different players have different techniques, but I've heard of a technique like where you approach kind of leading with your
heel of your palm.
Yeah, and so you kind of like get that where you want it, and then you can vibrate your hand like this to get the vibrato.
With the mass of your hand.
But it will also detect the rest of your body, so you kind of need to lean with that and make sure that's the frontmost part of you if you want to do it that way. If you happen to have, you can't have your arm behind you or like parallel with you because then your nose will be setting it off the theremin and so forth. So anyway, let us move on. But that,
and as a clarification, no, Adam, it's not the same Shure.
It is not. Thank you.
Sidney Shure started the Shure company in the 1920s in Chicago.
All right, thank you.
Well, it could have been something magical. But anyway, here we have Music Out of the Moon of 1947 by Harry Revel.
I am down with that album cover.
That's
that lighting.
Pretty risque for that era too.
Well, not even just the sex, but the lighting is lovely. That is great.
Has a very 60s feel to it.
It was very forward thinking at the time. I mean, not just thinking, I mean, forward sounding. Like if you listen to it, it sounds almost like, like what the Jetsons were. Like this futurism in kind of like but from the perspective of the era that it was from. But this sounded like it was futurism still from a little bit later than the era than it was from. So it's kind of,
if I was shown this just out of context, I would have guessed late 60s.
Right.
That looks really wow.
Yeah, and here are the credits.
Lee Baxter. Well, all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it was the Baxter Orchestra that played, and Harry Revel, the composer, and then the theremin performed by Samuel J. Hoffman again. He, I guess he worked outside of Hollywood as well, But I have links in the description once again. I wish I could play this so that we could just play it and talk about it, but
Oh, just play a couple seconds. It'll be fine.
All the
I
cool
don't-
kids are doing it.
This says the unmonetized guy.
Yes.
yeah. But
Don't
folks,
do
on your end, basically open a new tab and you can hear it while hearing us. Like especially that first song. I don't know if you guys checked this out at all, but that first song in there, you've heard it somewhere before. Trust me. In
Very
fact,
cool.
yeah, so if you kind of like hear that first song from this album, you'll be like, yeah, I've heard that before. Where was that from?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how some of these instruments, just the nature of them, end up creating a different style of music from what you're doing. They integrate, well with orchestras and all that, but there's just this. They seem like they're even if the theremin like died out in 10 years, the style of music that it creates ends up getting recreated with different electronic instruments in the future, and so it really kind of has this out of time sound to it for the era that it really starts picking up and becoming
Yeah,
popular.
there's like a unique prominence to this sort of sound that people constantly go back to. And in the chat, we were talking about Mars Attacks. Obviously, it's a direct reference to these types of films, but yeah, it's very singular in its feeling and its fluidity. I think was a great word to use.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we are going to go on to the next film. Speaking of Mars attacking, well, this wasn't really an attack, and I don't think that it was from Mars.
No.
Oh, Barbara and I watched the whole thing again last night, and
This
I
was
loved it.
This was more like a prevention of attacking.
It's a tragic story. It really is.
Yeah.
This benevolent alien shows up to give us a warning and just gets immediately shot. Like, wow. Okay, America.
Yeah.
And he does his best through the whole course of the movie to try and like find a reason to keep trying to help. And we don't really give him one as a society in this film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a good example of talking about like brown streams and other where people talk about the problem with politics in movies today. Politics have always been in stories. I mean, that's the nature of them. Stories are in many ways cultural artifacts, and politics is nothing but
if there's a hierarchy,
rules.
there's politics.
Right. Yeah. If you've got two people, you're going to start having politics, right? But the thing about The Day the Earth Stood Still is it's a very pro-peace, anti-atomic weapon movie, but not overbearingly, let's just beat you over the head with it, right? It cloaks it in a much more interesting situation, and the characters are believable and all that, right? So it conveys a message without yelling it at you.
Well, it's written in a sort of a lost art form way that allows you to make up your own mind,
right,
as you're watching the story unfold, and so much of that is gone now.
Yeah, and I think also the difference is this is more like a timeless philosophy, more rather than like of the moment politics. And
it's an exceptional looking film, and the sound design is 100% integrated and necessary. We just had such a great time watching this last night.
Yeah, so the link in the description, folks can check out now. It's just a short scene where Gort arrives, and basically, yeah, Roberto agrees with us, and Gort unfortunately gets shot. And I don't know, I couldn't see who did it or if it was just nervousness or whatever. But
yeah, I think it's just a nervous guard, isn't it? That
yeah,
he's going to surprise. He's like, why? No, stop. And Gort isn't quite understanding what's going on, and then he gets a real quick introduction to what's going on.
Gort was the real MVP here.
Yes.
yeah. And there was another movie that was mentioned in a podcast I listened to that was also from this time period and had a similar theme to it. It was uh, some. Could you run by a few names for me? It's
Ooh,
on
from
the
this
tip
era?
of my.
That were kind of visitor from
Yeah,
another
it
planet
came
dealing
from
with.
outer space.
Oh yeah.
There's this. It came from outer space. Oh, what's the other one in Washington?
Oh the oh god, what the flying saucers?
Yeah, Earth versus the Flying
Yes.
Saucers.
Yeah.
Which you have very much the same. I'm not sure which one came first. I have to check, but you have very much the same sort of tableaus of UFOs hitting the Washington Monument and then all of that high symbolic stuff. Um, the interesting thing that I was telling Barbara about last night is that film actually contains an electronic tone in the third act that is so irritating I have to mute the movie, and it goes on for like 20 minutes. Like the sound that they use to define the saucers flying
Oh yeah.
is unbearable. Like and I understand like trying to create discomfort in the audience and whatever, but like my 21st century mind can't handle it. Like I have to turn it way down. But they're fairly similar films. I think out of that specific genre, this one stands out on
Yes.
top.
This one also
Yeah.
the theremin is used both for the score, but also for diegetic sounds within the movie, isn't it?
I think so.
Because I'm thinking that like when the door opens to the craft, that theremin is actually used as part of the sounds of the craft.
That was the.
Yeah, it's
Go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry to.
I don't have a lot to add there. It just the term that I use is Mickey Mousing, where the actual movements and the actual beats, the physical movements are tied intrinsically to the sound.
Mm-hmm.
Where when if Mickey goes down a flight of stairs like 1, 2, 3, the music goes da da da, and you have that.
Mhm.
And I love it. I absolutely love that school of thinking for sound.
Oh yeah. Well, I think here once again now I see my mistake on screen. Samuel J. Hoffman and Paul Schur were both thereminists in this, and I just pasted it into the wrong one. But yeah, and the the rest of the score was good. Bernard Herrmann, who is not, I guess, a big name, but did a great job.
It's just it's such a good example of how when you hear a theremin, it sounds so alien. It sounds
Otherworldly.
Mhm.
otherworldly, and the fluidity. To to harp back on that, it just it has a at once it's synthetic and artificial, but at the same time there's a believable organic sort of um, tone to it. It's hard to describe, but yeah, Theremin's
Yeah,
magical.
I'm hoping that people are listening to some of these things as we go, because then you can see what we're raving about. Gosh, if I had a theremin here, I'd play it, because that wouldn't be copyrighted. But the only thing I can play would be clips that are largely copyrighted. I mean, I could probably find someone where they're doodling around, but then that
Well,
doesn't.
at this point, YouTube is just flagging you for having the same melody as a licensed song. It's gotten really oppressive. It's gotten
Wow.
really difficult.
I mean, I think in another 6 months they'll flag you for having a picture of a theremin, just because it
Yeah,
could be used to play
yeah. Our
something.
friend Jethro got flagged for showing stills of the black hole.
Wow.
Yeah,
Ooh, Mr.
we
Brown
did.
might be in trouble.
Yeah, we did a frame every 5 seconds. That's what 20 a minute or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, he got Disneyed just for showing
Wow.
stills.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, and fair use is completely out the window, because technically, when you're adding commentary and transforming it enough, you are allowed to do that.
Well,
You know?
it's a fudge line in the sand.
Yeah.
YouTube gets to decide, and Disney gets to decide what is fair. So you don't have a voice at that point.
Yeah. My wife's
It's a shame.
telling it
It's
like
a shame.
my wife's
I'll give
telling
up.
it like it is. Big companies don't need to worry about
No,
fair use.
not with the
Uh,
preferential treatment that YouTube gives them.
Yeah.
well, we could talk about the power scale all day, but
Mhm.
the sad fact is, just like a lot of social programming going on in new content, is that they're building a lot of ill will towards their customer base with all
Mhm.
of this nonsense. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, we could go on for ages. But in any case, I did want to mention one more thing before we move off of this. The other film that I mentioned, It Came from Outer Space, also had Samuel J. Hoffman in it, and kind of was a similar to this in that the alien basically came to Earth and just wanted to find a way to get back home. But, everybody, of course, treats him as like...
Well,
you
he
can
showed up.
understand being a little afraid, but
He showed up on a very noble mission to give us a second chance.
Mhm.
We were developing atomic bombs and so on, and he said, "Look, here's your warning," and then we shot him.
Mhm. Well, as we move on, the delicate delinquent. Now we're getting into some deep high art. This is 1957. Here's the credits for those that want to see it. And I'm pointing this out. The link is in the description. I mean, all these things that I'm linking to in the description are on YouTube. It's just they're either on channels where they have the right to have the material,
Yeah,
or
there are several clips, and you can watch the entire Theremin scene
yeah.
uninterrupted on YouTube, which is nice.
So I'm saying it's just kind of ironic. I can't play it because I'd probably get flagged, but some other channel has it on there. Now I can understand
Sure.
if the channel was like the publisher or the author or something like that. But when, especially that one from Spellbound, that clip, I looked at the channel, it's like, why does this person have it up? This, I just thought,
It should be public domain, which is the most irritating part about it. Somebody has
yeah.
claimed it, and it hasn't gone through the fifth filter yet at YouTube, and it's such a gigantic pain in the ass. I live with it every day.
Yeah. So anyway, here we go. The Delicate Delinquent. Here's our credits. I haven't. Anybody know of David Maguire? Nope.
That's not a
Okay,
name
so
that strikes me. No,
I do not.
So yeah, and we have some big movie buffs here. Of course, everyone knows the name Jerry Lewis. And in the link in the description, you can click over that to see the scene where basically he's approaching this room. I guess Jerry Lewis is playing somebody's like a caretaker in this boarding house.
And
And
he's basically the mop boy. He's
yeah,
cleaning the apartments. Stephen Foster rings a bell. I don't know if I'm thinking of Norman Foster, but
Stephen Foster made a lot of stuff in the 1800s, and he's referenced in Tombstone.
not that Stephen.
Yeah, I just hear, I mean, there was a composer that did the soundtrack of the film, but this clip doesn't have that in it. And so it's basically Old Folks at Home by Stephen Foster is what's being played at the beginning of the clip, and then, during it a bit, but that's the music that you hear in that clip. And
It is a
part of the
good clip. I did not enjoy what I saw of the rest of this movie at all. I'm not exactly a Jerry Lewis fan, but the bit with the Jerry Lewis stumbling onto the theremin and playing with it is entertaining.
Yeah, I just put it in there because it was probably for a lot of people. I don't know if it's the first movie to have a theremin pictured in it, but I think it's probably at least something that was a movie where it exposed people to it, because at this point, remember, it's people going to classical concerts that are hearing it in the concert hall. And then some people hear it in film soundtracks, but they don't see it. They don't know much about it
Right.
or anything. And so this is where probably, I guess, a lot of people got exposed to what it actually was. And they, in this case, they kind of make it something that was something that a scientist, had as you would think, okay, they're into science, so what would be a musical instrument they'd be
Well,
into?
let's be clear. It's a batshit crazy mad scientist who wants to send millions of frogs into space.
Okay. Well, we all have our endeavors. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's good to have a hobby.
Yeah, I mean, we all have goals. My race of atomic supermen are coming along just fine. But that scene in particular is like it's like an unfortunate live action version of The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yeah. But in any case, so funny scene. But I will say, special shout out to the corpse of Stephen Foster, wherever it is. Old Folks at Home is also known as Swanee River. It's a subtitle or a secondary title, and we live about 10 minutes from a bend in the Swanee River. So,
See, Adam, it was that Stephen Foster.
yep.
Really?
Stephen
Wow.
Foster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Frank Gorshin is in there, being a street hood creep that tries to grope a nice lady. We like Frank
Okay.
Gorshin.
Maybe he's just trying to give her
Okay.
good vibrations.
Yes, that's a great segue there. I have you on here, man. All right, so 1968, the Beach Boy released "Good Vibrations." Great misnomer. It isn't an actual true theremin that is in this music, and it's something that is often called a theremin, but it's a little bit different. It's a string theremin, or what Robert Moog called a stringer. He kind of made it for them. Basically, it's like a string of a conductive string, like a steel string, maybe like a guitar string, at the top of a keyboard. And basically, the player could run their finger along that string, and it would actually, it was tuned to line up with the keys on the keyboard. So wherever the finger was, that's the note you play.
Oh, so it was like an early ribbon controller.
Yeah, it was a ribbon controller.
I think out of the examples that we have here tonight is the one that sounds most like a steel guitar.
Yeah, but it was also because it's really hard to play a real theremin, and they didn't know that whoever was playing it on tour would really be able to, accurately play the lines show after show after show, especially considering the fact that it's probably not, it's probably a rock and roll musician, is basically the idea. Classical theremin, unless you'd have to pay them too much, to go on tour and just play one song. You know what I mean?
Is this graphic what the Beach Boys were using? Something similar?
No, not at
Oh,
all.
okay.
This is basically why people would relate it to a theremin, a true theremin, because Leon Theremin himself did invent the theremin cello. And so this would be one of the theremin cellos. And as you can kind of see there, it's a little bit of a box. It's not the big resonating chamber that you would have on a real cello. Basically, he also was involved in that, where he did make some things where, in this case, it would be a metal string, but like like Jay said, a ribbon controller, where basically you select pitch based on where you are on the string. It's basically acting as a potentiometer in this case. And so theremin did do that. So, it's still within the family, so to speak, to have used the string theremin in the Beach Boys. But a close thing to what the Beach Boys had actually was invented in 1928. Excuse me, 1928, and this is what we're going to be going into next week: the Onde Martineau, and we'll also look at the Troutonium while we're at it. The Onde Martineau eventually did have keyboards for it later on, but at first it was basically a string, but you could see like painted on keys so that you knew what notes you were at. But basically, it was a string with a ring. It was like a ring that you held, and the string would go through that ring, and where the ring was touching the string is where the placement of the note would be.
That's
And
kind of
so,
neat.
well, the other cool thing about this is it had speakers like the one on the left towards the top, the one that's kind of like an oval shaped. That is a speaker with strings on it. It was basically to provide a reverb effect. It was kind of like early spring reverb.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's
And so,
got kind of a lute and an auto harp electrified. That's interesting.
so that's where we're going next week. And I'm going to see if there's any way I could get little bits of Onde Martineau and play them on the stream, because, I mean, we just did a whole stream without playing any sound other than me doing that.
Wow.
and we certainly need a little more than this. But anyway, so anything you gentlemen would like to say now that we've gotten to the end and introduced what will happen next week?
I'm gonna hand it to Jay first while I formulate something here.
Yeah. So there's kind of an interesting history that goes back to why the Soviets were interested in the theremin. Part of their social idea is to make the new man, Soviet Hominicus, and the idea of new instruments that were the technology behind them or whatever it was discarding the old world and the middle class and upper class associations with so much of the music. And so the theremin being a new instrument created in Russia and with a very clean, simple sound, but could, obviously be made to be very musical, appealed to their artistic sensibilities of that era. And it makes sense why they would allow theremin to go to the U.S. to kind of show the superiority of.
In that sense, it and pardon the expression, it seems like a very democratic instrument. You don't need to be formally schooled to approach a theremin. You
I
just
mean,
have to have a decent ear.
but the thing is, I mean, you do require, I mean, to play a theremin well, or at least to consistently get, your notes correct and all that, requires.
Well,
a
sure,
lot of
harmonicas are $3, but it does seem like
Right.
an instrument for the people.
It's really about stripping artifice and become. It's the same reason that brutalist architecture was important, right? It's removing all of these decorations and making it as simple and direct as possible. It then there's kind of it's like an inverse bell curve for the theremin. It picks up and there's some initial interest in orchestral work. Then the movies love the hell out of it for sound effects and for creating atmosphere. And then it kind of drops into this valley for a while, but then comes back again in the 60s and 70s, and then with synths and all that, it just kind of comes up and stays. It always has this very interesting sound that is really hard to replicate with other instruments, and so I'm fascinated by the fact that it starts out as a problem for radio engineers, then becomes useful for proximity detection, and oh, by the way, if you mess with this enough, you can actually get it to be useful in the musical realm, and theremin never stops being, at least when he was in Russia and Soviet Union, never stops being a radio engineer, but sees this as something interesting and pursues it, and then how it kind of gets picked up and used, and really is what most people think of when they think about electronic music. That's kind of the thing that they fall back to and think of as the first really well known instrument.
Its uniqueness cannot be overstated.
No, definitely not.
There's something very specific about the tones at the end of this equation that come out that provide a very evocative, alien but believable audio experience. And so many of the older movies that I love and rewatch constantly feature this instrument, and there's got to be a reason for it. There's something in there.
It's a very
Well-
organic sound.
Yeah.
For as artificial as a pure sine wave is, for a musical instrument, I think the way that you move, and it's such a smooth transition, and little things can give it tremolo and vibrato and all that. It really does have this organic sound to it that is unique to it.
I've listened to singers that have like fantastic vibrato. Some of them that have like way too much vibrato. But when I hear it coming out of the end of a theremin, it sounds much more natural, for lack of a better word. It's believable. I don't know how to describe it. It's absolutely unique and fluid and wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have said basically everything that I could say about it. Although there's a couple things, since we're at the end here, there's a couple things that in my push to kind of get through that I left out that kind of relates back to what Jay was saying about, shall we say, the social politics of, this being developed in the Soviet Union. Basically, Leon Theremin, as I said before, was in the Tsar's army first. And then in the revolution, he joined the Revolutionary Army, and he, a few years in, he was a victim of what they called the Red Scare, which was basically because of his nobleman background. He actually had a family that was somewhat wealthy, and that was considered, not such a great thing in this great state of equality, or egality, I should say, not equality. And so he was basically imprisoned for a bit, and then they let him out bureaucratically. He somehow just did get coughed out because I guess there was no reason to keep him in, and it was probably to their benefit because then they could use his scientific mind. And so he was developing things for security, proximity detection, and the Theremin came out of that. And he was, that basically paved the way for him to be able to come to the U.S. because they wanted to show, what Soviet ingenuity could come up with. And as a result of that, he was teaching American musicians how to play the instrument, and they were pretty much from the classical school. Theremin himself was a cellist, and Clara Rockmore was a violinist, and so these classical musicians started learning it, and then at least one of them, Sammy, went into Hollywood, but so it got really introduced as a classical instrument, which was different because there's kind of like a little bit of, I guess, somewhat of a prejudice towards some instruments that are considered to be more folk or popular music oriented. Mm-hmm. Like I'm a saxophonist, and even though there is what they call a classical saxophone repertoire, it's not much, comparatively to other instruments. It was considered to be more of like a jazz instrument, and kind of popular in France. And, so composers like Ravel were able to, further music for it. But across the board, it wasn't huge in classical music. But here, from its inception, it was launched into the classical music world. And it was at the time where that Western art music world was experimenting. But let's get back to the social politics stuff again, because this is kind of interesting. So he comes to the U.S. in 1927, and then he was only in the U.S. for about 11 years because he started a company it was called Teletouch, because he also did research in early eras of television. In fact, he had like a prototype television before. Oh, I forget the name of the Scotsman that is credited as the inventor of the television.
Farnsworth?
Something Bogey. I don't know. But anyway, we can go with that. But from what I was reading, Theremin had actually come up with a concept earlier. I mean, it wasn't as smooth. There was a lot of problems with it, but they didn't have the funding to fulfill it. And so it was like the UK that was able to do it first. And so after that, he started this company, Teletouch, because he was interested in these kind of like security things. And a lot of his inventions then were used in the States eventually for like prison security and things like that. And so it was kind of like, all right, someone that's from kind of like your Cold War enemy is here producing things for your security. And a lot of that's going to be studied by the military and everything. But he kind of fell out of favor after a bit. He was seen as, as a potential spy. And but it's confusing as to which story is true, because some people say that he was actually kidnapped by the KGB and taken back to Russia. Some say that it was, he just went back because he lost his connections here, and wanted to go back, or had no other choice because his company Teletouch, basically went under, and he didn't have many shares in it in the first place, which was a bad business decision. So I don't know, but in any case, he ended up back in Russia in 1938. And pretty soon he was imprisoned there.
Yeah, not a good time to return to Russia.
No.
And
we're having another Stalinist purge at that time.
Mm-hmm. And he was accused actually of having a part in the death of a high military official. But eventually he was put in a part of the, shall we say, the prison workforce that was scientifically inclined and basically could still do work for the government. And so... and that's where he did more work for the Russian government again. And he actually developed a listening device that was successfully utilized in the American embassy over there. And it took him...
the passive one that you had to... So it
was a
required no
wooden...
batteries. It wasn't an active transmitter. The only way that it worked is if you were outside of it and beaming a radio signal at it, then you could actually pick up what they were saying, so it was very hard to detect.
Yeah, and it was in the embassy for 7 years, and so
they were all throughout the walls.
Yeah,
so like an RFID, you'd have to send a signal to it for it to actually.
Right. You had to excite it with radio waves to
sneaky.
Yep.
Yeah, so he was involved in that. So it was cool that he lived a wild life, and is a pretty interesting figure to study. I mean, there's so much I jammed in my head. I think a lot of it, just disappeared down the hole. But basically, I mean, it was kind of like somewhat of a sad ending, because he did eventually kind of get out of the prison and was kind of somewhat free as I guess you could be, but still heavily watched. And in the, I think it was in the 90s, I forget what year though, a New York Times reporter was doing a piece over there. No, it wasn't the 90s, because the Soviet Union fell around 91, 92. Mm-hmm. I guess it was the 70s, actually. 9s and 7s look alike. I think it was 77. I remember it was close, but anyway, a New York Times reporter went over and was in the Moscow Conservatory, kind of like doing a piece on how Russia was at the time. And he actually ran into this guy and soon discovered that it was Leon Theremin. And the guy was working on Theremin was working on acoustics in the Moscow Conservatory, and so he included him in his article for the New York Times. And then the Russian government decided he was too high profile, and he kind of went back to being kind of hidden away again, like working in a factory.
You wonder how many, like hundreds of thousands of good minds were treated that way. I mean, I'm not going to excuse America for not doing it because we have a NASA program, but yeah, that sort of depersoning that happens to all these like brilliant creators is really sad.
Well, it happened to him both ways, you know.
Yeah, there's plenty of them around.
He got it from both ends, and in the U.S., I mean, but the thing is, I can't actually tell. I can't say for certain that maybe Theremin did have some, missions that he was supposed to accomplish while he was over here. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they let him over here. I don't know. I mean,
possibly.
But but in anything, it looks like we benefited more from him being here than they did. But yeah, and it wasn't really until he was sent back that you really had, Theremin kind of working for Russia again. And so, but anyway, it's a confusing thing. And it's one of those things that I often think about, when the government boot comes down on your neck, it's like, what do? You kind of like do what you're told unless you
do what you have to do to keep going. This is what you do. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, on that happy note, do you want to say any closing bits about, I think we've announced B-roll stage, but in case anyone's joined us late or sees us on the recording, let's remind them that if you want some of this great film talk that you heard little bits of tonight, you can hear oceans of great film talk on B-roll stage.
I don't want to plug too hard, but if you go to YouTube at B-roll stage, we have a really fun, casual, but high energy show every Friday nights where we watch select films from the olden days. Some nights we make fun of them, and some nights we extol them, and it's never boring. And you'll find myself and Epper Godwin and Barbara Lawrence from the chat there every week.
Yeah,
and definitely check out this Friday because we're going to be doing Roger Corman's Fantastic Four from 1994.
Yeah, it's a big show coming up this Friday. This is a big one.
I mean, how are you guys able to play that?
I cannot tell you.
It's not as obscure as
it doesn't always go smoothly as people testify.
I was there like the first week that I listened to you guys kind of got stopped in the middle of a film, and then we just watched trailers.
Yeah, we got shut off 3 or 4 times. I think our second stream was like the first time we got shut off. And just terrifying, just absolutely terrifying. But I do try and screen the movies ahead of time. I spend a lot of time looking at what films are allegedly public domain. Unfortunately, there's no central resource for that sort of thing. And if I had the energy, I would create one because I think everyone should be able to share in these wonderful things. But yeah, we pre-screen as much as we can, and then we just sort of wing it from there. And I have lots of backup trailers and British public safety commercials that we can all laugh at if we get the hammer. But it's a good time. It's a long form show. We have a lot of hardcore regular audience members that show up every week, and we have a great time. So with that, I just want to thank you for having me on tonight. It's been a lot of fun and very educational.
Yeah, it's been fun, and I'll be there in the chat next week. And
awesome.
I've been enjoying it. I've been enjoying them a lot.
Hey, just fall asleep to it, man. Leave a tab open in your browser. Give us a view. Give us a thumb. We need it. YouTube won't monetize us because we're just too close to the edge. So,
do you think you'd ever be able to get the delicate delinquent in there?
Not from what I've seen this week.
It's not as good as good as the zombies of whatever.
So there's a thing where if YouTube is paying to license a film, you know how they present their own films? The Delicate Delinquent is one of those films.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So if it's in their library, there's no shot you're ever going to be able to show it, even if it's public domain. And then we run into trouble with Shout Factory that produces a lot of the MST3K content and RiffTrax content, where if the boys, who I love, have riffed on a film. Shout Factory seems to think they own that film, even if it's public domain, and we've had a lot of problems with that. So it's tricky, but we love doing the show because we love film and we love old films, and we're gonna do it whether we get monetized or not. So please join us every Friday, everyone.
Right. Well, that happened to my wife with some music. She composes her own music, of course, but for some of their videos, she just wants to use royalty-free music. So she used some GarageBand royalty-free music, and then it got spotted by CD Baby because some artist writes a song using royalty-free music in it and kind of claims it as theirs, and it's like,
well, and there's also a lot of poachers out there. There are people that will put free to use music up on YouTube. Go ahead, do whatever you want with it. And then a week later, you're hit with a notice that you can't monetize it for yourself because it belongs to them.
Yep, they'll claim your monetization.
Yeah, pirates. It's really bad. It's a rough medium, but we love the community. So thank you for having me here tonight.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Hope
much
I can
for
come
being
back.
here. Yeah, basically, just let me know. We'll keep in touch. Like if there's times you would like to come on, or if you have some ideas of stuff we can cover.
Like I said, I don't have a lot of technical expertise to contribute, but I have lots of unsolicited opinions. So,
and you said Jethro actually is capable of playing a theremin?
He's been playing a theremin with a live band for at least a decade.
Damn. Well,
yeah, I really wanted him to be here tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't pull that off, but he did have previous plans. And I will definitely.
It's completely understandable, but if he is ever able to come on some Sunday, it'd be great. I mean, because
he's also a very entertaining dude in general.
Yes, because I'm doing this.
If you go to any of our B-sides episodes, we have about 40 of them in the tank now. There's a link in the description for all of Jethro's social media links and his new film channel, Total Recall. So you should definitely check it out. His band is called Awesome Death Fan Club or something like that. He's in Austin. He's a very old friend of mine. Great guy.
Okay, great. All right, Jay, thank you as always.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
So I'll get you the slides for next week. And
sure enough.
All right. We want to thank our audience. Thank you, chat, for being there. I know we know of some of you, but at least you're not swappers. That's just an inside joke.
Well, you can put that on my tombstone. I had to unsubscribe from swappers on Twitter because I was having rage tweets.
Alrighty. So anyway, folks, thank you for joining us, and until next time, keep your ears clean because the worms do like a clean place to live. Take care.
Good night.